Is now the time for Taiwan to have nukes? Or will that only make things worse? Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Before I begin, China Uncensored is in trouble. You may have seen my recent episode where I went back in time to talk to a younger me to convince him to keep making China Uncensored despite the hardships. If you haven't seen that episode, that's because YouTube didn't notify you or secretly unsubscribed you, something that is very common. Which is the problem. I'm struggling to keep this show going. That's why I've launched Operation Honeypot 2, Electric Poogaloo. I need you to go to my website, ChinaUncensored.tv, and subscribe to officially join my China Uncensored 50 Cent Army. The website has exclusive episodes, live streams, and a vibrant community chat. Most importantly, there's no censorship there. I still need at least 1,500 of you to subscribe so I have enough money to keep this show going without being dependent on YouTube. If I can't get enough subscribers, I really worry about the future of China Uncensored. So head over to ChinaUncensored.tv, the link is below. And watch to the end of this episode, I may just bring out that time machine once again. Well, it looks like things are really heating up in China. No, I'm not talking about China's more and more frequent and bigger incursions into Taiwan's seas, although yeah, that is a thing. And I'm not talking about China's ever-expanding military, although that is also going about how you'd expect. No, I'm talking about nukes. According to CNN, citing multiple sources familiar with US intelligence assessments, the Chinese Communist Party conducted a secret nuclear test in 2020, despite China's moratorium on nuclear testing, which has been in place since 1996. And they did this as part of a push for a completely new nuclear arsenal. Now, there are a lot of questions to be asked here. Who are these sources familiar with the US intelligence assessments? What exactly are these next-generation nuclear weapons China is reportedly pursuing? But on top of that, a US official said earlier this week that China has massively expanded its nuclear arsenal. It's pretty clear that China is preparing for something big. Something like, oh, I don't know, maybe war with the US over Taiwan. Even nuclear war at that. It's kind of like thinking someone's going to make a charcuterie board and then you see them revving up a chainsaw. I think they'd want to get themselves more than just a slice of meat with that bad boy. So if you're thinking, well, yeah, but maybe this is all for show, right? Well, according to a study by the Center for Strategic and International Studies and the MIT Security Studies Program Wargaming Lab, there is a distinct possibility that China would use nuclear weapons if they believed they'd lose a conventional war, especially if it posed an existential threat to the CCP. They're like the kid who loses a game of touch football, then throws the ball on the roof so no one gets to play. Only it's a nuclear football, and instead of ruining playtime, it's nuclear oblivion. All this raises a key question. Should Taiwan have nukes? It sounds crazy, but look at what happened in Ukraine. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons at the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances in 1994 in return for security guarantees from the US, UK, France, China, and Russia. And now, some people are wondering how history would have played out had Ukraine kept its nukes. It's like guys who open carry. You're way less likely to get mugged if people see you're strapping heat, especially if that heat is nuclear that'll melt your skin off your skeleton. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine giving up nukes was absolutely stupid, illogical, and very irresponsible. Will Taiwan have the same regrets? Like Ukraine, Taiwan gave up on nuclear weapons, or at least the ability to produce them. Taiwan had a secret nuclear weapons program that ran from the 1960s to the late 1980s, with a secret research reactor and a reprocessing plant. But before they could actually produce nuclear weapons, the US caught wind of it and pressured Taiwan to stop nuclear development with the help of a CIA informant. Had Taiwan succeeded, it may have been able to deploy nuclear ballistic missiles and nuclear-armed aircraft against China. So why did the US stop that from happening? Several reasons. For one, the US was afraid of nuclear proliferation. It didn't even want allies like South Korea and Japan having nukes. It was also afraid that a nuclear-armed Taiwan would escalate conflict. Chinese leaders have long warned that if Taiwan acquired nuclear weapons, China would respond with force. which is basically saying, we're going to keep harassing you, but if you try to deter us, we're going to harass you even harder. You also have to remember, this was the early 1980s. The US believed that a nuclear-armed Taiwan would harm efforts to normalize relations with China. There was hope at the time that perhaps China was liberalizing into an actual democracy. So much for that. But just because the US shut down Taiwan's nuclear weapons program doesn't mean the people didn't think about acquiring nukes from time to time. During the third Taiwan Strait crisis, when China launched missiles near Taiwan, then Taiwanese President Lee Teng-hui declared that Taiwan was reconsidering its nuclear option. Missiles raining down near you have a funny way of changing people's minds. But a few days later, he walked back on his statement. Because missiles no longer raining down near you has a funny way of changing people's minds. As far as we know, there's no public information showing that Taiwan has any nuclear weapons. And in recent years, Taiwan, under the DPP, has pushed for a nuclear-free homeland, with former President Tsai Ing-wen even joining marches for it, which includes shutting down all existing nuclear power plants when their 40-year operating licenses expire. That is an ongoing issue centered around meeting domestic energy demands. If only you could power Taiwan with Chinese threats, then they'd be full of energy, until China stops making threats and starts acting on them. So Taiwan probably isn't going to be pursuing nuclear weapons anytime soon. But what about putting US nukes in Taiwan? I'm not just talking about nuclear-armed submarines nearby or bombers within range. I'm talking about nukes deployed on Taiwanese soil. Some argue in favor of that. They say deploying nukes on Taiwan wouldn't trigger war, but actually prevent it. And just think of how cool they'd look wearing a strap big enough to open carry a nuke. Among those calling for American nukes on Taiwan are Captain Jim Fennell, the former Director of Intelligence and Information Operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet, and Bradley A. Thayer, Senior Intelligence Officer for China at the Office of Naval Intelligence and a friend of the show. They propose bringing U.S. B-61 tactical nuclear weapons to Taiwan.
Well, I think the first thing we should do is, at this point, because things are so dire, is there really needs to be an open dialogue with Taiwan immediately about how we can introduce tactical nuclear weapons into Taiwan.
China analyst Gordon Cheng also favors nuclear deployment.
Then I think the United States should help Taiwan develop nukes, and I think that the United States should actually transfer nukes to Taipei.
And this wouldn't be unprecedented. The U.S. has had nuclear weapons in Taiwan before. Under Dwight D. Eisenhower, the U.S. stationed about a dozen nuclear weapons in Taiwan. Although keep in mind, this was back when China didn't have their own nukes. Eisenhower even considered using them when China started shelling Taiwan's islands. The number of American nukes in Taiwan increased to over 200 under Lyndon B. Johnson. They remained there until the U.S. withdrew them in 1974 under Richard Nixon. So what would be the point of having American nuclear weapons on Taiwan? Deterrence, of course. The Ukraine war has shown just how resource-intensive war can be. It's been tough supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russia. And China's power dwarfs Russia's. As things stand, U.S. missiles would run out within days in a war with China. That's why some people say the U.S. should enhance deterrence by rebuilding its theater nuclear forces to include tactical nuclear artillery shells, tactical nuclear bombs, tactical nuclear warheads for cruise missiles, and new short to intermediate range ballistic missiles. Essentially tell weapons manufacturers, yes please. The U.S. used to have nuclear artillery shells in Europe and Asia until George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton decided to retire and destroy them. Nukes could absolutely obliterate Chinese invading forces, and by having them on Taiwan, this could signal that the U.S. and its allies really are dedicated to getting into the fight. Then again, China's operating on the assumption that the U.S. and its allies are going to fight for Taiwan anyway. So it's going to just keep preparing, saying it's only making a charcuterie board, all the while revving up that chainsaw. Some are against putting nukes on Taiwan, saying that it would give China justification to attack Taiwan. Although to China, justification to attack is like a bidet. It's not essential, but it is convenient. Some also argue that precision weapons like missiles can do the job of nuclear missiles. One could argue that the US bringing nukes to Taiwan might help China mobilize international opinion and compel the US to make accommodations in order to de-escalate. One could also argue that it wouldn't matter how many nukes there are. If China's determined to invade Taiwan, it will do so anyway, knowing that it'll face nuclear threats. The thing is, with the CCP, there are risks either way, because to them, not reunifying with Taiwan is an existential threat. This is why they hate China Uncensored, because I keep exposing stuff like this. But I can't keep doing it without your help. Subscribe to my website, ChinaUncensored.tv, and join what I call the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army to stand up to the CCP and YouTube censorship. So now let me crack out my time machine and ask future Chris if we save the show. Wait, where is he? Hey, I'm down here. What the?
Yeah, unfortunately we didn't get enough subscribers, so as a cost-cutting measure, I shrank myself down like in that Matt Damon movie.
Oh, that's terrible. Folks, please don't let this be my future. Click this button to go to my website, ChinaUncensored.tv, and hit that subscribe button.